Let's welcome Dr. Ozcelik.
Thank you. Does this work? Yeah, okay. All right, so we have a packed room, so... well, it'll be a personal presentation, treat it that way. So you can ask more questions, interject, don't feel bad or as bad. So as Chris said, I've spent some time, like 3 decades in semis. Someone was asking me this, but it's a little funny how life takes you to places that you would never imagine. But effectively, I was a nerd, math geek. My dad was a math teacher. I was really into math and science. That's how it typically ends up. But I also wanted to make money. I saw Dad was not making enough money, so I said, you know what, I'll go into engineering. And it turns out actually semis were hot at that time, double E, so I ended up getting a degree. And one of the companies that I always wanted to work in was Sony. Great brand, it was the Apple of the time. I said, okay, but there's no Sony in Turkey, this is where I grew up. So I went to closest to get an internship, which is Sanyo, which is another Japanese company. It was great. Then I ended up coming to US for a graduate degree, and I ended up working for Sony for 7 years in their semiconductor company. And we built DVD chips, and that's what got me into NVIDIA, interestingly enough. Because NVIDIA at the time wanted to build chips for consumer electronics. They had just come back from CES, Jensen and Dan. They said, this is growing, we want to have chips for TVs too, because they want to be after every company, every product that had displays, because they were the graphics, processors, as you know. So I joined, they hired me, it was an intense interview, and sessions, I guess. But one thing led to another, and after graphics, we bumped into some guy in Michigan, out of all places, doing compute on GPUs, for God's sake. This is like 2004, 5 timeframe, before anybody had any idea about all of that. And they were actually using something called GLSL, Graphics Library Shader Language, which is basically a long way of saying, showing your lefty with your right arm. And I have torn tender here, so bear me, but I shouldn't do that actually. Please do it the other way. So I said, Jensen, there's something here, because this guy is getting 100x acceleration on GPUs, doing computer vision algorithms. Is there any engineers in the room? Awesome, let me see. Yeah, okay, so you would understand what I'm talking about. So they were basically, he was doing disparity map calculation on stereo cameras to calculate the depth, so you can actually see ahead and avoid collisions. It's a small company out of Michigan. And then we followed through. Of course, Mobileye was just starting to come up. I presented to the board. I said, we should take the whole the whole automotive business at NVIDIA to compute. This is back in 2006. Before we even hired, Ian Buck, who built the whole CUDA stack from Stanford. And one thing led to another. I guess the lesson in that is you just follow what life gives you along the passion that you always had. And that's how I ended up in intelligence, AI, for cars. I built that business from ground up to now it's like $6 billion. I left some time ago, but basically we had racked about $2.5 billion of business when I left. So it was an interesting experience, and I learned a lot from Jensen. Of course, Jensen shaped my life. He and I are still friends. But now, of course, ironically, I have something that we're competing and trying to be an accelerator to Jensen, which is why this is interesting, I think. Energy is the biggest problem in AI. Hopefully you agree with that. I will show you some graphs and I will show that. And we have something that's basically 100 times better than the von Neumann architecture, which everybody else is on if you're a digital company, like NVIDIA is. It was invented in 1945 by von Neumann, 80 years ago. And it's kind of, I think, done its job, and now it's time for something different. We do have something at the architectural level, 1000x, and that's what everything is. So if you have something, is another thing I learned from Jesse, if you have an architectural advantage, which is what he had with massively parallelizing the entire compute, you can actually do a lot of amazing things. That's why NVIDIA became NVIDIA. It's architectural advantage. Do you have something that is insanely better than anybody else? Intel ignored it. Everybody else ignored it, but he built it on the parallel process that he invented. So this might seem like a joke to you. Hey, this little company is extending the Moore's law. Moore's law, of course, is transistor count in single wafer on die, and the same die basically doubles every 18 months. It has run its course as well. That wasn't supposed to happen anyway. That is not good. Let me see. Okay, so let's go to, I'll just do it like this then. Hopefully this will show. It is very weird. So this slide doesn't show? Okay. Can we do it from my laptop? Maybe that's better. Because otherwise we're going to have to stop. Yeah. Otherwise you will not understand anything, you will be mad, you will... give a hard time to Barry for pulling you into this, which I don't, of course. I want a happy Barry. Let's see if that works. Nope.
You might have to advance it because I didn't want to take the time to do the clicker on the.
I got it.
You got it?
I got it. Okay, I'll just do this. That's fine. I'll just do this. So, again, I think we do this, and I'll show you why. Steve is one of my board members and a long-time investor in the company. Steve Jurvetson is a big guy. This guy has invested in XAI, buddies with Elon, everything that Elon does, Tesla, SpaceX, etc. And he tweets a lot, and he has massive followers. Like one tweet, he tweeted on us, got 13 million views. This is the Moore's law chart that Steve puts out. He maintains it. He took it over from Ray Kurzweil about, 17, 18 years ago. And he basically says, we are at the, just one second. Okay, that was the problem. Okay, there it is, yeah. So he basically says that, this little company, Mythic, is on top of NVIDIA and Tesla. This is calculations per second per cost. It's the 130 years of Moore's law. He updates this, he actually presents at Stanford. He has a course at Stanford that he talks about this. And this is what it does. So some customer, I think he had said this, Tanner, you don't even extend, you shouldn't think of it as extending the law, you should think of it as rewriting the law. I don't know, I like either way, and I'm super happy that people recognize this little company. So IBM is one of our competitors. IBM is a big company. The reason we save energy, by the way, is we have something that is human-like or brain-like in silicon, which is the closest thing to I've seen human brain in silicon. IBM put out this chart and basically says that, von Neumann kind of plateaus out at 1 TOPS per watt. You have to go to digital in-memory, so companies like D-Matrix accelerate to that to get another 10%. And analog AI will give you another 5x, but if you really want to do this well, you need to have optimized materials, basically what they're saying. Let's see if this, can you see that? Yeah, exactly right here. So, well, we don't need any optimized material. we're already there. So that's what Mythic is, and that's why I'm excited about this company. So people, in the startup world, talk about innovation. They have paper, presentations. They are raising billions of dollars on PowerPoint because this is a major problem. But when you have something that is incredibly tiny, and we show you the chip, and it basically mimics the human brain, I think it's so it's this right here. It's a little tiny chip. It works. It's the world's first analog computer in production. It's on a little card that has no memory around it because it is memoryless. Because just like human brain, everything is done in memory. You don't need a separate memory. I'll show you why that is the problem. So spent about $200 million on it. Came out of the University of Michigan. But this little first chip that I showed you is actually about 100 times in per watt per cost. Now Satya Nadella is a big guy, of course, right? CEO of Microsoft. This is his most favorite metric. Per watt per cost. And we're already about 100x. I said this, but there's a massive problem in AI, right? So in energy, in AI. People are buying nuclear reactors. They're trying to basically build the data centers next to the reactors. Massive amounts of money is being funneled. This chart shows you the expectations of what's going to happen in the next decades, I guess. This chart is a little old. By the end of the decade, I think it will be about 10% of the entire power grid in the US will be in data centers. So it's a massive problem, running out of energy. So let me show you this to you in a different way. This chart here basically shows the supply of the energy that we have been doing over the last, n number of decades is growing at about 2% per year. The energy need that we have for AI is growing at about 30-40% per year. The compute demand from AlexNet in 2012 to 2026 now has basically increased about 1 million times. So the compute demand has massively increased, and we're only growing the energy by about 2%. So instead of being 2% of the entire world's power, which is about 25,000 terawatt hours, so 500, let's say, terawatt hours that you can take, we're going to go to something like 20%. So where are you going to come up with that extra 20%? That is the key question. We don't have energy. That's why Elon Musk is not joking when he says, we're going to go to space. They're actually working on it. Sending data centers to space. It's not a joke. Planet Labs is also working on a prototype. I was in DC 2 weeks ago, and the government is also working on it. So this is a massive problem. Now you might say, why hasn't it become a problem so far? Like, we talk about it, but it hasn't really dinged it. We haven't really seen the heat. Here's why. This is Volta. This is Ampere A100, Hopper, and then Blackwell. Well, if you look at the bolded text there, basically says we have lowered the precision of doing AI. Now, AI is actually a very simple math. It's not a complicated math. Any, even non-engineer would understand it. It's basically a matrix multiplication, but you do so much of it that you spend so much energy on it. And what has happened over the past years is that we went from like floating point 32-bit, incredibly high precision. It used to be actually even before that like 64-bit double precision, improved double precision, etc. Now down to 4-bit. You can actually run networks on 1-bit and get really good accuracy these days, like 67%. But what do you do after 1-bit? The NVIDIA has improved. Jensen knows per watt is everything. He transferred the company's thinking, entire strategy to per watt when I was there in 2012 with the Kepler generation before Volta. And the way they do it, as I said, is basically taking advantage of The other thing that happened in the industry is that we've gotten a lot of optimization in the algorithms. So mixture of exports, you might have heard about it. You know, DeepSeek came out in January of last year, and they shocked the world because they could basically train just as well, you know, performing network with something called mixture of exports with only 37 billion parameters per export, and mimic something like 670 billion parameter version of, say, what OpenAI was doing. In many benchmarks, in fact they're ahead. Quantization, distillation, sparse, you know, matrix activation, all are incredibly important advances. We also got better at utilizing these things. So we optimized the batching, so there's something called batching. That's how you get the throughput. This is what NVIDIA has to do. But the biggest driver is actually coming, and in fact it has just started happening, it landed, which is inference. I mean, you probably use this, like your usage of AI probably gone up by 10x since last year, or since 2020, and in November 2022. At least for me and for all the people that are on me like that. So basically, training cluster takes about 50 to 150 megawatts. Per GPU, you're spending about 700 watts. That's like, you know, 35 times a dim light, you know, electric bulb. But the biggest problem is that you're doing billions. So training happens once, inference happens in billions scale. That's why the problem is even more eminent. So the math that holds it together is like this. So we have million times faster compute demand since AI started back in, let's say, 2012 with AlexNet. But through precision gain, algorithmic efficiency, the utilization, as I said, we're now down to about 20, 30, maybe 40% per year per energy consumption. But even that, as I told you earlier, is a massive problem. Right? So what do you do? I mean, this is what's going to happen. We are running out of bits. You can't go down to sub 1 bit in digital. We're at 4 bit. NVIDIA is going to probably introduce something like 2 bit, although the accuracy is not that good in the next generation after a little bit. But then you're kind of dead. There is no more really juice to extract. So that's where we come in, and I think the timing for us is incredibly good. And there are 3 ways to solve that problem. One is effectively joules per inference. So you look at what you spend, and you try to minimize that energy consumption. We go and basically invest in new energy sources. You know, people are talking about fusion. You might have heard about it. SMR, small modular nuclear reactors, advanced geothermal, of course, space. And so, but there is a little thing called analog computing that's here and now that can actually help with that problem, right? And people have thought about neuromorphic. We fall into neuromorphic chips, but many people recognize that analog AI accelerators actually can solve this problem. I have a lot of amazing investors on my cap table. So one of the guys that I'm super proud of is Andy Bechtolsheim. Andy started Sun Microsystems decades ago. He invested in Google as an early investor. He started many companies and recently founded Arista Networks for all the backend, all the networking in AI. He's killing it. Amazing company. And he's very, very excited about it. In fact, when I pitched this to him, he goes, Tanner, I thought, he didn't think that we were doing well, so I thought that analog computing was a lost opportunity. I'm so glad you're reviving it. So send me the material, I'll invest. And then within 24 hours, he sent his approval and signed it. So the thinkers, the big thinkers are with us, which I'm super happy about. Obama had done this study in 2016. By the way, it's not unknown, like Elon Musk is talking about a brain-like chip. Satya Nadella has said it, Sam Altman wants a brain-like chip. Everyone wants a brain-like chip because, human brain spends about 20 watts per day. and 10 watts of it goes to limb controls and walking around and things like that, and 10 watts is intelligence. So how is it that you can go on just water for weeks on end, not even food, and do all these amazing things in your brain, and we still are trying to mimic it with mega clusters, like spending gigawatts data centers and cannot do human level intelligence. This is the problem. So the 16 professors came together in 2016, and they looked at what can be done. We mapped ourselves to that study. Of course, the company wasn't founded at that time, but Mythic is at the frontier of the speed and power is basically 2x you evaluate yourself in, and we're right at the frontier of that. These are the numbers. The most important line in this chart is this line, energy per operation. This matrix multiplication I told you, it's MAC. It's multiply, accumulate. It's very simple. 2 by 2 matrix, 1, 1, 1, 1 times, another 2 by 1 matrix, 2, 2, 2, and then you can multiply. This is the way to do it. You just do so many of them, trillions of them per second that gets out of hand. We're at the femtojoule level versus picojoule level with phone level and NVIDIA. We do everything in memory, and we do it in sub-bits level. We basically literally move electron by electron, which is the insane part of this little chip. This is von Neumann on the left, and the problem with von Neumann is you go back and forth in this bus between the memory and the processor so many times. And it was devised that way because the industry wanted to have a processor and a memory. And of course, it worked those 80 years. But now you have to swap the parameters, these billions, trillions of parameters, basically now, as you do the calculations back and forth, especially with with the attention in the new LLMs, attention layers of the new LLMs. I'm not the only one who's saying this. There's a lot of papers on it. You can read up on it. And these are 2 papers that I cited here. 90% of the entire energy problem is actually spent. Energy is spent in that memory bottleneck. These are some numbers. In throughput, reads per second per byte, we're about 29,000 times in per watt, or picojoules per byte access, we're about 3,000 times better. This is how it works. For the engineers in the room, it's actually incredibly elegant. This is the circuit, if you will. It's a bunch of flash cells connected in series and parallel. And you shove the input vectors as voltages, and then you multiply them in one cycle because the current just flows through them. And then you end up getting this, I is equal to G times V, which is inductance times voltage, which is current. And then in one cycle, 160 nanoseconds, you can get 1,000 by 1,000 matrix multiplication time. It's insanely good. We actually turned a storage device, a NOR flash cell, into a compute device. That's the juice or the secret sauce of the company. We have basically changed what we have in every one of you today have lots of NOR devices in whatever you're carrying. If you have an electronics, it's there. The cells that we use have shipped 150 billion units to date. It's incredibly mature. It's not like some of our competitors who are still trying to design and invent on the cell itself. So that's why I'm super hopeful about it. I'm, of course, a massive thinker. I've seen Jensen do this. He's all about strategy. So basically, you have to ask yourself, okay, how can von Neumann or NVIDIA, where can they go? Well, the solution that they have is basically HBM, high bandwidth memory. You might have heard about it. Right? So people are basically going crazy on the new generations of it. What's happening there is that you're stacking that memory on top of each other so you can actually maximize the bandwidth that you have between the processor and the memory. Well, we looked at what they can do in the next 4 generations, 4E, 5E. Turns out, basically in the next 7 to 8 years, they'll be able to only increase by about 3x. While we're already at 300x out to shoot. So it's insanely sustainable, let me put it that way, right? So this is, Jensen's slide. NVLink is a big deal. NVLink, actually, I was in the room when he invented this. You might know it's NVLink 72. Basically, how do you make 72 GPUs look like one GPU so you can program them like that, even though they are not produce on the same wafer. So if you were to aggregate all of them next to each other and imagine a wafer, it will be that size. That's what he showed in one of them. So it's a big deal. This technology is a big deal, but they have to do that because it's a chunking architecture. We don't have to do that. Our little ninjas that I showed you can actually snake the whole network, and then we can scale sideways and up and down incredibly well. These are the numbers. You know, it goes up to about 500x in tokens per second per watt. In LLMs, this is a 70p version. This is a trillion parameter version. In fact, our numbers get better, like up to 750 times as we go higher in the number of parameters. And of course, the number of parameters are increasing as well because, you know, human brain is about 86, I think, billion neurons and 100 trillion synapses, which are the connections between the neurons. So there's still ways to go in the parameter count, and we do better as the parameters go up, because we don't care if that matrix that I showed you in that circuit is 1,000 by 1,000 or 2,000 by 2,000 or 10,000 by 10,000. You just glom them together. It still runs as one little current, you know, electron by electron, as I mentioned. It's incredibly elegant. That's why I'm excited about this. I mean, you know, Chris did not mention, but I thought I retired after Ozcelik, right? So, I achieved my goal of, 55 years old, and a certain number of money, and I'll just go, travel the world and things like that. Turns out I had no other hobbies but building things, building companies, businesses, and friends were not available as much either. So I love this because it's incredibly unique. I came out of retirement to do this, and I wanted to do something super impactful. The other thing is this. NVIDIA, like with that architecture that I mentioned, NVIDIA has to choose between latency or throughput, right? So you batch the crap out of it to actually get the throughput. This is just a major weakness of the architecture. In fact, Jensen is amazing. Of course, he showed this at GTC last year. Hello? Battery's dead. All right, so he showed this at GTC last year. And what he was saying is, and he was speaking to the geeks in the room, which is, hey, you guys think that I have to choose between throughput and latency, which is throughput is vertical access, which actually translates directly to revenues for data centers, or latency, which is basically tokens per second per user, which means you can have more users or return the answers to the user that's using the chatbot a lot more faster. He said, I found a way to bump the curve up into directions at the same time. Well, what they did was micro-optimizations. That's why these are dots. There are 16 different dots that they had actually hand-tweaked. Well, you can't hand-tweak your way to the heaven. We can go 5x this way, 10x this way, and this is what's going to happen when I show it to them next to the DGX, hopefully next year, early next year. And we'll see what happens. I mean, he and I still, of course, are friends. We talk all the time. He knows what I'm doing. So we don't have any compromise because we are a single batch architecture that just do this. I mean, I'm talking probably too geeky for you, but this is a big deal. We're focused on 3 different markets. Auto, data center, and robotics. These are the top focus. I'm also getting a lot of interest from defense. In fact, one of our investors, as you see, is Lockheed Martin. They put some serious money into the company because of a few things that we're doing with them. Like we're in fact engaged with all of their divisions today, including the RMS, which is the chopper and devices and stuff like that, and then the MFC, which is the ammunitions, and then also the space guys. These are the numbers. So the first chip is 100x, as I said. The next chip that we're building is going to be 20x more on top of it. So it's going to be about 2,000 times. And people ask, hey, how are we going to compete with India? They have everything. Well, if you have a massively better solution to the most important problem on Earth today in technology, I think some people are going to take a chance on us. And that's why, of course, I'm doing it as easy as possible too. I mean, the software has to be there. I've learned from Jensen how important software is. And I had like 80% of my team in software. He has now the entire company, almost like 90%, 85, 90% of the team
engineering team is in software reports for one guy, Dwight Dukes. That is the key guy in the whole company, and they make zero revenues in software, but they make 90% gross margins and have about 90% market share in there. So that's why software is important. This is a study done by Germans, basically, rate us at the top of the pack in maturity, and compared to all the near memory or in-memory kind of companies out of Dresden. We're getting some coverage. This is some of the older coverages. This is a funny thing. I mean, I asked ChatGPT, hey, who's the leader in analog AI in the world? These are the answers, 5 answers. IBM, I mean, we compete with them. I'll share the numbers. I think beat the crap out of them. And then Intel is licking through their wounds, of course, and Modi is not going anywhere. Airbus is not even an analog AI chip. So this is a hallucination somewhat. And then D-Wave is a quantum computer. And quantum computing, I think, is ways away as well, at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half or so. So the only real analog computing company is there. And I asked, like, okay, why are they the leader? Is that reasons? I mean, it's basically the maturity, the reality, the readiness of the technology, etc., which is what we've done. Well, we just raised a massive round, $125 million, and you'll see the investors, but it was crazy good. And one of the investors is NEA. NEA, New Enterprise Associates out of Valley. I forgot to mention, but we are an Austin headquartered company, so that's partly why I'm here. But we do have offices now in 4 different locations. I'm in Palo Alto. We have a larger team there now, and then we just set up an office in Bangalore and also in Germany. So we're in 4 different locations. But the reason that NEA, and Scott Sandell meeting, he's the CEO of NEA, I think that meeting was my best meeting because he reminded me of Jensen. Jensen loves to ask you questions, and he just wants you to answer them right away, not wait just the way he asked it in precision Q&A, And I did that, so I ended up basically telling my story to Scott in the way that he thought, his own chain of thought, and it was an amazing meeting. And then he said at the end, okay, so we'll do this, what do you need? I said, data center. I don't have any experience in data center in data centers. I have experience in auto and robotics. I grew businesses there, but nothing data centers. He goes, yeah, we'll help you there. But I later learned that they had turned down every other semiconductor AI chip investment. I mean, this is one of the top 5 VCs in the world, almost $70 billion under management. They have founded VC industry with others like Sequoia and so forth. And they are, of course, they were one of the investors, early investors in NVIDIA. That's why Brooke Sivo, another general partner out of NEA, is still on the board of NVIDIA. In fact, they had Brooke call Jensen to ask about me personally. Is Tanner good? Can we rely on him, etc.? Which of course should happen. It's an honor to have them because they turned down Cerebras, which is about to go IPO. They turned down Grok, which just got acquired for $20 billion. They turned down Samba, one-times Torrent, Edge, all these other things, and they're kick-ass. And DCVC led the round. DCVC, Matt Aka is an amazing individual. We were covered at Bloomberg for that as well, but Matt basically, put this up on LinkedIn, I think. He likes to, create things. Steve tweeted this, which basically says that, energy efficiency will define the future of the AI computing everywhere, so which is what I had put in the press release, which I totally agree. I think that energy efficiency will absolutely define the future of AI. And that's why I'm super excited about it. We got a customer. Our first customer, major customer, turns out it's this top 7 OEM. I mean, it happened to be my experience in auto. Like, as I said, I was there for 3 decades. Honda loved what we were proposing, so they gave us a massive amount of money, double-digit millions. In development money, signed a joint development, and we're building an associate together with them. And they invested in the company, also double digits. So we're super happy to have them. I'm incredibly happy with my parties now. I have more people on my staff. As you see, the marquee names there, Treaties, Gavin Baker and company. I mean, Gavin is incredibly smart. Matt is incredibly smart. Future Steve, SoftBank is an investor. S3 out of Austin, a massive probably know them. Yeah, Aaron's on my board. Aaron Herman.
Hey, Charlie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, environment team, Honda, Lockheed, lots of other people. So we're super happy to have them all. This is how the chip architecture is. It's basically a whole bunch of analog, stuff. We call them analog processing units and digital and SOCs and stuff like that. The APUs themselves are kind of like an SOC. So it's an SOC of SOCs. SOC stands for system on chip. So it's complex. You've got lots of heterogeneous stuff going on. And all the memory cells are here, like the neurons, and then we go in and out of them with digital conversion, digital to analog conversion, DACs or ADCs. This is insanely hard to do. Like, we spent years to get this right, because you have 512 of them. You have to make sure that the noise characters are done right. The trade-off between noise and power is extremely well done. The bit precision is there for you to do it, because you're not really, precisely counting the electrons, but you're basically making accurate enough for you to do a calculation at the end, which will basically be a judgment of AI to see, okay, this is the next token, or this is the object that you're about to hit or not. So a lot of work went into it, 35 patents and more coming. This is the stack. I am just incredibly proud of the stack because, again, this will be the reason, one of the major reasons that people are going to move to our hopefully platform. Because you have to make it frictionless. Like, software is everything. If you just build a chip and have no idea about software, just like some of our competitors, toying around, you're not gonna, compete with NVIDIA. NVIDIA, like, one of my assets, I think this is partly why all the people there investing in us as well, is that I am from NVIDIA. I know NVIDIA. I know how good Jensen and the whole company is. So in a David versus Goliath story, you have to know the weaknesses, and every company has a weakness. So even NVIDIA has a weakness. Energy is one of them. This von Neumann, a year-old problem. They can't change that overnight. The other is edge. They're not very strong at edge. I mean, the strongest business was my business, which is still the strongest, I think, like 6 billion, as I said. But everything else is kind of meh. Do they report on any other thing? Auto is the only edge business. I mean, even robotics, right? They're making grounds, and I'll show you. In fact, the kit that I built and launched with Jensen on a Sunday afternoon over gin and tonic, after he shut down all the names that I came up with. It's called Jetson, like out of flying cars. And we're now compare our results on that kit. Like, we plug in that little card that I showed you, and we show with and without it, by itself and with this little chip. And it's 10x better. Software is everything. Compiler is everything. Compiler is basically how you take the code and allocate it to the compute engines that you have. NVIDIA wins on this. CUDA. C is compiler, or compute or compiler. That's what differentiated NVIDIA. UDA is incredibly important too, which is Unified Driver Architecture, which means you can take one driver out of their website. This happened in the gaming from the beginning of the company in 1993, UDA. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to tell what GPU it's running on, it just figures it out. So the drivers are forward and backward compatible, which is exactly what we do also. And we have exactly the same strategy here. We made ton of optimizations. This is gonna, I think, shock people who are trying to do analog computing. It's not easy. The data flow is not easy. The compiler is not easy. And if you multiply all the optimizations that we did, it's like 100,000 times over 4 years. 100 times. So we were at about 2% utilization of the entire compute fabric. Now it's almost like, maximum, I would say about 80-85%. And that's all we can do. We are religious about how we release things. Almost every 2-3 months we release something. I separated the wafers for those of you who are in semis. This is very important because analog runs on a slower geometry treadmill, meaning like it's 28 nanometer, which is actually an advantage because it's cheaper, much cheaper that way. But you don't want to hamper the digital side, and half of the chip is digital. It's a hybrid computer by not being on the same advanced node like NVIDIA, which is 2 or sub 2 nanometers today. So we separate the wafers. That's what I did. We're now bonding them. This is crazy good. We did this at the previous company on semi. In imaging, NVIDIA cannot do this because to bond wafers, you have to have very, thermally right, because one wafer's thermal characteristics can actually destroy the other wafer. they're not low power now. But we can bond them because this analog wafer is incredibly low power, as I showed you. This is how we scale to data center. Only 1,024 chiplets. We can get up to about 120 pops. So petaops or pops, and consume less than kilowatt, which is also insane. Trust my word on that one. This is the trillion parameter version of it. It's fascinating. This one is actually probably the most interesting. This will change a lot of the stuff. This is basically going to make my dream or vision of like having brains everywhere in every little device as smart as what you have on your laptop today when you're talking to your favorite AI chatbot. The way we're doing it is we're changing the memory. The memory is NOR now. If you go to NAND, NAND is not AND, so it's a different kind of memory. But basically, you also have that in your devices today. It's basically what I gave my presentation in a flash drive, and flash is all NAND these days. And it's incredibly dense. I mean, they're basically packing like 300 wafers on top of each other, so you can get these, 256 gigabytes of little memory for less than $10 on Amazon today. That's why. It's an incredibly cost-effective device. So we figured out a way to pack ChatGPT 3 onto a single NAND, like little NAND. That's what this is. Craig Martelli, the CTO of Lockheed Martin, when he saw this, he was like, holy cow. Because what this means for us is they can have chatbots in the devices, in tanks, in helicopters that have no internet connection or cannot afford to put like a little server in the back of the device or vehicle to have this. So they can communicate. I said, why are you so interested? He goes, well, our manuals are now like 2 million pages. Our soldiers cannot figure out what to do with them. It's impossible to actually figure out what to do when you have a malfunction. So it's going to go everywhere. This is basically going to be the little brains everywhere. I'm incredibly proud of it. This is the Honda deal. It will amount to something like $3.2 billion in annual revenue, so we're done with it. It will take a few years to get there, but we are getting paid in the meantime, as I said. These are incredibly good engineers. I mean, I'm so proud to work with them. This is Shiwa-san in their Tokyo headquarters. They actually built the RBT. If there's any Formula One fans here, these are the guys who built the engines and the car. Right? So RBP2, RBP20, they won 4 years in a row. We watch F1 together, like when we sit down and have lunch in our training room. It's fascinating. They're incredibly smart engineers, both in aerodynamic and the engine itself. And in fact, Mibe-san, who's the CEO of Honda, is now driving this project. And he said, basically, we want to build a new engine for Honda, which are these little neuromorphic chips that I said, which is basically based on them. They came to us. We didn't find them. Like, it's pretty insane. They want to do something like 5,000 tops in 300 watts. If you were to use an NVIDIA chip, by the way, Tesla is about 2,400, and they're not self-driving. Basically, Waymo is in the hundreds of thousands of tops level. So that's super expensive to get into a consumer car like Honda. Super practical. They want to sell great cars at the lowest cost possible. You need something like this. So if you were to use running out of mics.
Oh my goodness.
Another power issue.
Yeah, we
can hear you.
Yeah.
So if you want to, if you want to basically do 5,000 tops in 300 watts and not only drive to your neighbor, you need our chips, is what they concluded, because NVIDIA will consume about 70% of the entire 70 kilowatt hour battery if you do this. Of course, they didn't come to us initially. Why should they? I mean, we're a little tiny company. They went to IBM, which is also doing analog, but they realized that what IBM is doing is effectively what we have today in one chip, they are promising maybe in 2 years at a rack scale. So it won't scale into cars or anything like that. So that's why they found us and came to us. We're building something incredibly useful. You might have heard Jensen talk about physical AI. I think that will be the next big wave. I mean, you should listen to every word that this guy is saying. He's really good. He called out inference time scaling, which is now, we just entered and we're in that wave. This is like 100x bigger than training.
He called out the post-training with the reinforcement learning, human feedback by LHF and things like that, and of course the pre-training before that. So, I was there, of course, when we, bumped into deep learning. We were feeding GPUs to every research house at that time. The universities like UC Davis, North Carolina, John Owens, things like that. So believe me, listen to him when he says the next wave is going to be physical AI. Physical AI basically is going to be all robots. I mean, when we look back in 10 years, and one of the things that I think we'll see is, how did we do without them like 10 years ago? Sort of like what we had today for internet today. It'll be game changing. And the key to that is the new class of models, world models they call them. So vision transformers stack on top of each other. Jan LeCun is advancing them. JAPA, JEPA, Joint Embedded Primitive Architecture, which basically says that, hey, I have one of the transformers that's modeling the world as is, and another one that's modeling a crippled version of it, and another one that actually models one from the other one. That's how they get to really insane accuracy levels, which means you can now start to understand 3D. So when I have a pen, and and I drop it, I know it's going to have some physics maybe fall down because of the slant and stuff. So if I have a knife, I won't do that and try to drop it on my foot. So that's 3D reasoning. We don't have that. LLMs cannot do that yet. This is the way to do it. That's why physical AI will be here. When we get this done, the industry, this will basically be the ChatGPT 3 moment of physical AI. Another thing is, I call it Project Starlight. Basically, the idea that I had was, how can I turn a sensor, and I remember I built sensors, $1 billion business, 300 million chips, we shipped every year. This is called a 3rd-inch optical format on the back of your phone. Same thing in cars, same in robots and things like that. How can I turn this into as good seeing as a SLR camera? You are probably photographers in this room. You can see in a pitch dark, you go in, you take a shot, you can actually see what the eye cannot see with that 2.5-inch sensor. So my idea was, hey, if AI can extract signal from noise for cybersecurity, why can it not do it for sensors? There's equally noisy. When you look at it, it looks like noise, but well, we did that. So I'll come back to this, but basically, the reason I was also, maybe I'll just say it now, the reason I was also excited about this as a strategy, again, I'm just a strategy person, is if we do this, we are going to rule the sensing world, is what I said. Because this die at the top is incredibly it's called photodiode.
I think we're going to have some questions.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, yeah. Okay, I'll finish it up then, yeah, almost done. Photodiode array is super thermally sensitive. So you will burn this die if you are really packing a digital computer. There's no way a GPU can be here, or a DSP can be here. So you need to have something like analog, super low power to be able to stack them. And every sensor nowadays is stacked. So this is the result. We're now running this on the chip, and this is what you can see. Right? So we can turn a pitch dark scene into a sort of visible, quite visible, almost like day and night scene. Like this. And this is incredibly important for mission critical applications like automotive, right? Because it could mean the difference between killing or saving a life. Like in this case, for instance, the lady is invisible with the child in her arms. 2 dots turns out, it was a wolf. These are the differences. Like here, for instance, look at this. We're running this is all out of the chip that I showed you. So we can turn something invisible and save the life of that lady with her child in her arms. And so automotive guys are super interested. Another problem is dynamic range. We're improving the dynamic range too. So we're making sensors see better also. We're putting these little brains into, effectively, like imagine you have a little part of your brain in your eye as well, so it's seeing better. So that's what basically this is doing. I'm just going to say something here, which is going to be quite profound when we're done with this, but DeepSeek showed that you can actually do a really good model and train it with just FP8. You don't need the FP32 like we used to do. Floating point, again, lower precision. Well, we have now cracked the code on FP8 in analog. So that means that I can do training at the edge meaning I can have these little chips embedded everywhere that can train themselves over time, just like humans do. I mean, how do I train myself over whatever? Driving. You don't go over a pothole that you saw, yesterday. You take another road. So same thing. So it'll actually train itself. So it will open up a whole new market for us, which will be training at the edge. We again show ourselves, on Jetson with and without. These are the results. So you can see a handbag like in 250 meters at Jetson. NVIDIA cannot see. You can see with your own eyes here that there's about 10x more inference going on. This is a defense application. Same thing here. You can see, effectively 10x with your own eyes that you see on the right hand side versus NVIDIA. We're into robots, working with a lot of companies. This one is interesting because this is, what it's doing. So dexterity in robots, these fingers basically grabbing, cups and stuff like that is the toughest problem. And we are working with Honda actually to solve that problem. Working with other humanoid companies, and we saw one of them, Agility, which is another portfolio company of DCVC. This is a defense application. These are actually robots built by Fordham that hunt other robots, like they call them drone hunters, working with them. And you can see that they basically spew out a net to see when they see another robot, just bring them down. And so the further they see out and the more they can fly is incredibly important for them. So that's why I sent the kit to Adam, the CTO, and I said, Adam, I'm not going to send any engineers with it. Please, do what you can with it just to test the maturity of our kit. Does it work? And they came back with these answers. So we can see better. The range is also incredibly good, and the classification is a massive thing. So last is this, and we are, I think, onto something. This analog processing units, APUs, I call them, and I think if we do our job right, we should be able to, I hope, someday make APUs a household name like GPUs have become, and at least make them to be the accelerator of choice next to GPUs and CPUs, just like Jensen strived and still talks about it like this, has made GPUs the accelerator of choice next to CPUs. So that's what Mythic is now. In whatever time